Good morning, living waters. It's a New Testament passage. You know who it's gonna be. If you've been watching these videos, you know which underdog I'm going. I'm going to Paul, my man. All right. There are others who do not appreciate the genius and the faithful witness of St. Paul as much as I do. But we'll get there. Don't worry, I'll rub off on you. All right. So we're talking about Paul. Which you could say, Pastor, how is Paul an underdog? He was a Pharisee at a young age. He's a teacher. He's a Roman citizen. He's clearly brilliant. How is he an underdog? Many would have assumed he was a prodigy, one of the best of the best. Good question. It's interesting because while Paul appears to have it all together, clearly something was missing. Right? He's risen through the ranks. He is a smart guy. And yet it's still empty for him. And it was only Christ who was able to fill that void. Even though, sometimes, especially in this virtual, and again, talking about that pandemic the marathon of the pandemic, right? You know, on a computer screen, people can look like they really have it together. They may not. I mean, you know, the joke around the pandemic, right? You see this much up, right? People are probably wearing shorts underneath their business suit, right? We can't see everything. And so, yeah, that's true of Paul. Clearly, he didn't have this together as everyone thought. And in fact, Paul writes about it in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 that we had 2 weeks ago in service. The passage that when speaking the truth, when speaking God's word, that God's grace is sufficient to cover our weaknesses. My grace is sufficient, says our God. Okay? This is not the words of someone who has it perfectly all together. Rather, this is the words of someone who is in need of God's grace, just like you and me. These are the words of an underdog. Because Paul talks about he has a thorn in his side, a weakness, something of his that just stops him from having everything that he wants to do. We don't know what it is. I have some theories. Another video for another time. But, yeah, clearly he has this mentality. But yet, this underdog writes in 2 Corinthians 12:9, my grace is sufficient for you, says our God. That's the underdog message right there. You know, I think this is best heard. There's a song I heard recently. Your grace is enough. You know, we sing that one a lot. Your grace is enough. That's what they're quoting, okay? Your grace is enough for me, right? That's what the song's about. That's what this whole week's been about. Whether it was Moses, whether it was Martha, whether it was David, whether it was, who was the other person we had? Paul, whether it was Jonah, right? Whether it was Chris, whether it was Amos, whether it was Jesus. God's grace is sufficient enough. Despite our weaknesses, despite our past, despite the emptiness that we have inside that can't always be seen, despite our worries, despite our obstinance. I should have used it with Jonah. Obstinance is better instead of despite of stubbornness, right? In spite of all of that, God's grace is sufficient. That's why we share the grace of Christ at Living Waters. Because God's grace covers all. God's grace empowers us to answer the calls. God's grace takes us and works with us and brings the best out of us and for us and for our community. That's how God works with underdogs. There are no lost causes. Okay. Get me fired up again. I'm going to end up getting a second sermon at this rate. All right. With that, have a wonderful weekend, my fellow underdogs. I hope you enjoy it. I will see you back on Sunday. God bless you all.